Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are cracking open the ultimate genetic cold case. We tend to think of human history as this neat, straight line leading directly to us, but the truth is far messier and, honestly, endlessly fascinating. Think of the deep past as a sprawling, dusty detective board. We've got missing suspects, environmental clues, and literal genetic ghosts hiding right inside our very own DNA. So, grab your magnifying glass. Today, we're putting on our researcher hats to investigate the branches of the human family tree that didn't quite make it to the present day. I want you to genuinely challenge yourself to imagine this for a second. If you could somehow time travel back just 50,000 years, which is a total blink of an eye in evolutionary terms, who else would you meet? Well, you wouldn't just find early versions of us. You would step onto an ancient, crowded Earth shared by multiple, entirely distinct human species. These were beings shaped by extreme climates and harsh landscapes that would absolutely break a modern person. Some looked a lot like us, while others were built completely differently, shorter, heavier, or uniquely adapted to their specific corners of the globe. So what happened to everyone else? Why is the planet today populated by only one type of human? The answer doesn't have a clean, cinematic ending. It's slower, it's messier, and it's infinitely more interesting. Okay, let's dive into this. Case number 1. The veterans. Let's open the dossier on our first missing species, the absolute ultimate survivalists of the human family, Homo erectus. Now, to truly understand their story, we have to wrap our heads around the sheer staggering scale of their existence. Homo erectus emerged around 2 million years ago. To put that in perspective, think about our own modern history. Everything we consider a human achievement, every sprawling city we've ever built, every complex war we've fought, every intricate language we've spoken, all of it fits inside just the last few thousand years. That is a tiny, tiny footnote compared to their run. Homo erectus was on this planet for a stretch of time so unbelievably long that they basically outlasted everything the Earth threw at them for nearly 2 million years. And there's a good reason they were so incredibly successful. Homo erectus possessed the very first recognizably human bodies. We're talking long legs and shorter arms, a frame perfectly designed for walking and running over open ground. Because of this, they were almost certainly the first human species to leave Africa and spread into completely uncharted parts of the world, surviving in environments they hadn't even evolved for. They also developed stone tools that were so effective they barely changed over hundreds of thousands of years. Talk about a winning formula, right? But even the ultimate veterans eventually meet their match. Their final chapter played out as they became isolated on the island of Java in Indonesia. Cut off from the mainland, the forest they hunted in began shrinking, and the animals they depended on became scarce. Without enough space to recover or new territory to move into, these highly successful pioneers slowly ran out of options, disappearing around 110,000 years ago. Moving on to case number 2, the misunderstood. We're looking now at perhaps the most heavily stereotyped species in our evolutionary tree, the Neanderthals. For decades, pop culture has written them off as dim, brutish cavemen dragging clubs around. But that caricature was always wrong, and the more we learn, the more wildly inaccurate it becomes. The reality? Neanderthals were built for survival in ways that are hard to overstate. Their bodies were compact and powerful, featuring thick bones and strong arms. They had large noses specifically adapted to warm up freezing cold air before it ever hit their lungs. And their brains? On average, they were actually slightly bigger than ours. They were incredible hunters who took down massive, dangerous animals at remarkably close range. In fact, their skeletons show patterns of wear and tear that are shockingly similar to modern-day professional rodeo riders. On top of all that, they made sophisticated tools, controlled fire, and there's growing evidence they buried their dead with profound care. So what happened? Well, it was a compounding pressure that slowly cornered them. Neanderthals lived successfully across Europe and Western Asia for over 300,000 years. But around 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began moving into those exact same regions. Instantly, you have increased competition for the best land and the exact same animals. Second, while Homo sapiens lived in expansive networks, Neanderthals had a social structure of smaller, much more isolated groups. That made it incredibly hard for them to share resources when times got tough. Add in wildly fluctuating climates that were constantly reshaping their environment, and you get a species under immense, unrelenting stress. Their genetic diversity plummeted, signaling a steep population decline, until they finally vanished from the fossil record around 40,000 years ago. They weren't wiped out in one dramatic movie-style event. They were just squeezed out by a changing world. Case number 3, the invisible. Now we turn to a mystery that still gives researchers goosebumps. We're talking about the Denisovans. This is a species known almost entirely through a massive, undeniable genetic shadow rather than physical bones. Just imagine digging in a cave in the remote Altai Mountains of Siberia, and you find a single, tiny finger bone, a fragment so impossibly small it could comfortably sit right in the palm of your hand. For most of scientific history, that would be a complete dead end. But thanks to modern tech, scientists were able to extract DNA from this tiny fragment, and the results were absolutely earth-shattering. It didn't match Neanderthals, it didn't match Homo sapiens, it was something else entirely. That little bone revealed a completely unknown, invisible branch of the human family that had been hiding in our genetic record all along. And since then, we've only found a handful of teeth and a piece of a jawbone. Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer scale of their invisible legacy. Despite leaving almost no physical trace in the dirt, their genetic footprint is huge. Modern populations across parts of Asia and Oceania carry their DNA right now. In fact, some Melanesian groups carry as much as 6% Denisovan DNA. And it gets even cooler than just percentages. Take the EPAS1 gene, for example. This is a specific Denisovan gene inherited by modern Tibetans. It actively allows the human body to function and survive at extreme thin air altitudes where most people's bodies would simply start failing. This is an unbelievable twist in our cold case. A human species that completely faded out as a living population around 30,000 years ago is quite literally helping living humans breathe today. Their legacy is alive inside of us.
Case number 4, the island anomaly.
For our final case file, we are shifting our investigation to the year 2003, onto the Indonesian island of Flores. To understand the bizarre things researchers found there, you first have to understand something called the island effect. Basically, when species are isolated on islands for extremely long periods of time, the extreme geography drives some highly unusual evolution. Large animals dealing with limited food resources tend to shrink over generations, which leads to things like dwarf elephants. Conversely, smaller animals often grow much larger because they don't have their usual predators, resulting in things like giant, terrifying storks. It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, I know, but this was the very real ecosystem on Flores. And it perfectly set the stage for a completely unexpected type of human. Enter Homo floresiensis. This species was an anomaly in every sense of the word. They stood barely a meter or 3 feet tall. They had brains roughly the size of a grapefruit. And yes, they lived right alongside Komodo dragons and those dwarf elephants we just mentioned. Their fossils date from about 100,000 to 60,000 years ago. Now, what's crucial to note here is that a tiny, highly specialized species living on a small island doesn't really need an apocalyptic asteroid to disappear. Sometimes a small population simply runs out of time when facing new, sudden pressures. And modern humans were arriving in this exact region around 50,000 years ago. So the crucial point is the sapien secret. We've looked at 4 incredibly well-adapted species that all eventually vanished, which pivots us to the ultimate question of this explainer. What is the sapien secret? Why us? It's really easy to fall into the trap of human exceptionalism here. We like to pat ourselves on the back and think the obvious answer is that we were just vastly more intelligent than everyone else. But as you can see, that logic falls apart pretty instantly. Neanderthals had massive brains and were highly intelligent. Denisovans were adapted to absolutely extreme, punishing environments. Homo erectus outlasted us by a timeline so large it breaks the mind. So we really need to dispel this myth of raw individual intelligence. Instead, we have to look at the structural differences in exactly how we lived our daily lives. The secret wasn't just what was in our heads, it was how we connected with each other. Homo sapiens didn't just live in groups, we actively built much larger social structures. We created expansive networks across vast distances. And this meant that tools, techniques, and critical survival knowledge moved between communities at a scale other species simply didn't match. When a harsh climate shift occurred or a crisis hit a specific region, vital survival knowledge didn't just die out with a single isolated community. That knowledge had already traveled. We had the unique flexibility to dynamically reorganize ourselves because our social safety net was cast incredibly wide. But hey, we also need to be incredibly humble about this. All the networking in the world doesn't make you invincible. Geographic placement, having favorable population numbers at exactly the right moment, and a massive, healthy dose of sheer luck played a huge part in our continuation. We were absolutely not destined by the universe to be the last one standing. We just happened to be the ones who caught the right breaks at the right times while maintaining the social networks needed to actually capitalize on them. I want to summarize the core findings of our genetic cold case with this really powerful thought from the researchers. The other human species weren't early, defective versions of us. They weren't simply stepping stones on some predetermined path leading up to Homo sapiens. They were highly successful, incredibly resilient species in their own right. I mean, Homo erectus survived for 2 million years. Neanderthals conquered ice ages. For most of human history, we were just one equal branch of a much larger, diverse family. And they didn't just disappear into the void. They left a permanent, living legacy that is completely intertwined within our own DNA. Which leaves us with a final, rather provocative thought. The evidence strongly shows that our ancient cousins often perished when they became too isolated, while our ancestors survived because they built expansive connected networks to weather the literal storms. So, as the very last surviving branch of the human family tree living in an age where people consistently report feeling more disconnected and isolated than ever before, is our modern isolation our greatest vulnerability? It's a profound lesson passed down from our genetic ghosts and something to deeply think about. Thanks for exploring this fascinating cold case with me, and keep questioning the history that makes us who we are today.